It's time for the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast.
We've got lots and lots of things to talk about and to do today. Covering the territories from the 1940s to the 1990s.
It's the best thing going today.
Interviewing wrestlers, referees, authors, and other media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great.
The cream, yeah. The cream of the crop.
And now, here's your host, Tony Richards.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel History Show. This is Tony Richards coming to you live from the Richards Ranch in Western Kentucky. Hello everybody from the Bluegrass State. We got another great show in line for you today. We're going to be touring the state of Florida. And of course here in January, the entire month of January on the show, we are reviewing the existing territories that are remaining in 1985. And we're looking at that year in capsule form with our various territory experts. And today, Howard Baum is going to be here because he does the Florida show with us. And typically, we would be going into 1976. And we are going to touch on the 70s a little bit today. But in line with our January theme of reviewing 1985, it will be interesting to look at the territory of Florida, which is in flux. And it had a terrible, terrible tragedy right at the beginning of 1985 on Super Bowl Sunday, as a matter of fact. The guy who really took Florida to prominence, he originally partnered up with Cowboy Latrell in Florida. He was the #1 babyface in the territory and had tremendous feuds, the most notable being with Professor Boris Malenko in the 1960s and various other people. And today we have a real insider who is going to be joining us, Bruce Owens, who knew Eddie Graham very personally, very closely, and you'll hear Bruce talk about that on today's show. We'll also talk about a lot of the things that were principles in the territory that kept it strong for so many years. We'll talk about the impact of Dusty Rhodes. We'll talk about Dusty Rhodes leaving in 1984. We'll talk about a lot of stuff in 1985 that I think is going to be critical for us to record exactly what was happening as the WWF was going into national expansion mode. Jim Crockett Promotions was going into national expansion mode. Mid-South Wrestling under Bill Watts is going to undergo a brand change at the end of 1985. They've got national expansion on their minds. The world-class wrestling in Dallas, Texas, has been on satellite for years, has been in syndication across the United States in various markets for years. That we're going to talk about in another episode. But what's going on here in Florida? Because I think there is a misconception out there among people, and the farther you get away from history, you just sort of consolidate it when you're talking about it, and you have a tendency to have a bias toward the end result, which we know the territory in Florida did slowly die out. But in 1985, was it really in that bad a shape? Because you hear a lot of people talk about, well, when Dusty Rhodes left, boop, the territory just went to shambles and nobody came to the matches anymore. And Dusty's leaving did have an impact. But listen in on the show today to someone who was there in 1985, who was very active and knew the Hiro Matsuda very well, who was running the company at the time and was involved in refereeing in a lot of shows. And he'll talk about that. Bruce Owens is going to be with us today, along with Howard Baum. At the end of today's show, of course, I've got some things to tell you about that we're doing here at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, but I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go now to that conversation at the Richards Ranch with my good friends, our analyst Howard Baum, and our special guest today, Bruce Owens. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, live from the Richards Ranch in Western Kentucky. I'm your host, Tony Richards, along with our regular Florida analyst, Howard Baum, and we have a wonderful, wonderful show in line for, you're going to be glad that you tuned in today because this is going to be fantastic. We're going to be talking about championship wrestling from Florida, and Howard has a very special guest here today that can tell us a whole lot of stuff. So, Howard, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Man, you guys, today we've got a treat for you. It's a full circle moment for me because in September of 1982, a man showed me the way around the ring. He showed me the ropes, literally. He is a locker room leader, an after-hours legend, a ring general. He's done everything in championship wrestling from Florida that you can do. From timekeeper to ring announcer to pilot to eventual referee, including famous matches such as Brody and Hanson against the Road Warriors, the Battle of the Belts. If you know who I'm talking about, you know, and if you don't, you're about to find out. The world premiere, the podcast debut of the GOAT, the NWA troubleshooting referee himself, one of my oldest friends in the business, Mr. Bruce Owens. That's
Fantastic.
right.
Wow, man. Welcome, Bruce.
Oh, that's a hell of an introduction to live up to, you know?
You've lived it. And that's what
40
we're
years
here.
in the making. Guys, I first met Bruce in 1982. He showed me the ropes in the Miami Beach Convention Center. He broke in the early 70s. And man, you're going to hear some stuff today from the inside of the inside. And I want to let you know that this is a rare daylight taping for me. I usually don't allow to be taped anytime before 7 p.m. because my mouth barely works before noon. But this episode had to come together quick because of the subject matter. I said, we've got to get Bruce Owens. He was there. And man, I can't wait to get into it. I'm going to lay back. Tony and Bruce, do your thing.
Well, Bruce, first of all, welcome to the show. And let me ask you, what got you interested in wrestling to begin with?
Well, like anybody else, I was a wrestling fan, you know, got hooked on championship wrestling from Florida. And my brother took me there when I was young to a live event. And, you know, I was hooked anyway. But once you were at the Miami Beach Convention Center, and this is back in the days of Joe Scarpa and Jose Lothario, Louis Tillett, the Stroheims, and you know Eddie Graham, Malenko, and you know
Sam Steamboat.
Steamboat. Yeah, how could you not get hooked? You know, seeing that type of stuff. So the Infernos and Mephisto and Dante, and you know, it was just a great time in wrestling. And as a kid, where you're 100% believing it, and you know, you're going to school and you're doing figure fours on kids and you know doing all the stuff that's you know you don't know how to work, so you're just shooting on everyone. And you know I wasn't the biggest kid by any means, but I think all of us in schoolyard trying wrestling holds stretched each other quite a bit, you know.
So let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about Eddie Graham quite a bit today, but what was it like during the transition in that first golden age that you were just talking about in the 60s where Eddie Graham was the top baby face? What was it like in that transition to Jack Briscoe?
um You know, like anything in life, like, you know, my generation isn't going to be the generation that's the younger generation's following. So every generation needs their own hero. So, you know, at that time, it's Eddie Graham and Lothario and Tolet and these guys, and you know the Briscoes are coming up and everything. But you know, you think about it as the fans get older, they're going to identify with somebody in their age range and stuff. And here was Briscoe. You know, he didn't have to cheat to win. He could wrestle, and you know, I think one of the things that added credibility to the business back then was guys could go 30, 45 minutes in a match, you know, and when the world champion was in there, 45 to 60 was nothing. So how could you not believe in somebody like Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. When you saw those type of matches?
Yeah, and
So
so there were a couple of transitions going on there in that time period. You had Eddie transitioning to Jack. You had Gene Kaniski transitioning to Dory Funk Jr. And then, like you just mentioned, there were going to be classics for the next 7 years just between those two guys, Funk Jr. and Jack.
Yeah, and I remember, Eddie, there was a guy, and Howard helped me. I think his name was like Frank Bosch or something like that.
Frank
He
Bosch, he was
Miami Beach.
a PR guy,
Yeah.
PR guy down there.
Okay. Yeah.
He worked
So
close with the Dundees. Frank Basha.
yeah, there you go. I was getting confused. Paul Bosch. I knew it was something similar, but I'll give you an example. Dory Funk Jr. and this is in the '70s, early '70s. Dory Funk Jr. arrived at Miami International Airport, and Channel 7 Sports is interviewing the NWA World Champion, and it's on legitimate news.
Huh.
And that was set up by guys like Frank,
Right.
who had this. So, the mystique about is it real or fake? Well, there you got Channel 7 News covering the world champion and Jack Briscoe when he came in and stuff on regular sports news at the airport because they just didn't have the access to these guys.
Right.
They flew in and got out. So that added that credibility of this new generation because, you're looking at Eddie and these guys that are older. And as fans, we legitimize them. But if you're a viewing public on Channel 7 and you're trying to believe this is the hero and he's an older guy, I mean, people aren't going to watch it,
Yeah.
that interview. But when you go ahead and you had somebody like Jack Briscoe or Dory Funk Jr., and they show a couple clips of the matches during the interview, now you got credibility. And Frank was instrumental in that because you got to think back in that time of getting, wrestlers on primetime sports. And I'm talking about the 6 o'clock and not just the 11 o'clock news.
Eddie was a stickler for legitimacy. And Howard and I have talked many, many times about how you could take a lot of championship wrestling of Florida and it would fit right in with Wide World of Sports because that was that feel for it. Did Eddie ever talk about that? Did you ever hear him say much about what he was aiming for there with the legit part of the business? I mean, I know he had different bookers that came in under him, but he was still the overseer. Did he ever talk about the realism and the legitimacy he wanted?
Oh yeah, Eddie said if the fans start yelling fake, like you failed, and he says you have one shot at it. Every time you go out there, it's got to be real, because you have 1 week where you go out there and you're real, and the next week you're fake. He says you've lost it all.
Yeah, Eddie came up in West Texas. Well, he first came up under the Roy Welch in Tennessee, but then he went to West Texas in the 50s, and he came up under Doc Sarpolis and Dory Funk Sr., and Doc Sarpolis was originally the booker for most of Texas in Houston. And back in the 30s and 40s, when Wild Bill Curry was feuding with somebody or whatever, he basically invented blading because he said our fans are starting to think this stuff isn't legit. We've got to put some realism into this. And he started saying, you're probably going to have to take a chair shot or two legitimately to make sure that fans who are sitting on the front row know that this stuff is real. And so Eddie heard all that, right? I mean, Doc Sarpolis basically invented the false finish in wrestling. And so Eddie came along and modified that and added another false finish or two to matches and innovated that stuff so that the fans would think, holy crap, I thought that was the end, right? And there was still more to go. So you can just tell by the style that he really believed and wanted the fans to believe.
Yeah, there were times that Eddie did, he didn't have me smartened up, but he knew I wasn't dumb, and Eddie would say, like, there was a match and he says, you think people will pay to see that again? And I would say the diehards will, but I think people will want something else next week. And Eddie would say, you're right. You know, so basically, what I said validated what his thought was, but
Yeah,
because
and
Eddie rode with me,
he was
but,
kind of
but
checking to see your level of understanding of the business too, like where what you were seeing jived with what he was thinking, right?
yeah, and Eddie's thing was every week has got to be better. And I remember, and I can't remember who the wrestler was, but Eddie basically said, you better understand that your match tonight is designed to sell tickets next week. And that was Eddie's philosophy. Don't worry about what you think about the match tonight. It's designed to sell tickets next week. So it was always the buildup, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, and it's. I mean, I talk about this all the time. It was amazing that, yes, New York, Philadelphia, Boston could draw 18,000 people once a month, but in the southern territories, we had buildings of 5 or 6,000 that we were selling out every single week, 52 weeks a year. It was a different business model, but much, much, much tougher for a booker.
Exactly. I mean, you know, um, you had to not have, only a creative mind for, hey, let's do this or that in the ring, but you had to have that forward vision. And I mean,
Almost for like 12 weeks in a row, right? I mean,
yeah, I was going to say 3, 4 months out because, sometimes you go in this direction, you got to modify it a little or something, but the story's got to go a couple months out because of TV.
Uh, so what year did you start with Eddie and with the promotion and start being more around and more involved on a regular basis?
I would say late 70s, like I said, a lot of times it was, being with Eddie and Eddie coming in the daytime, going to a town. I didn't understand everything, but I knew Eddie was in charge. And, Eddie would be going in, negotiating buildings and everything. And Eddie was really keen on who was on that front door.
Who else did he have around him during that time that was, you could tell were in charge of a few things here and there?
Well, obviously there was, Duke Kiamoka and Hero, but Hero was he wasn't in the office as much. And and I lived in Miami and they were in Tampa, but I don't know if what Hero's level was as much. It wasn't like getting into finishes and all this and everything. Back then, a lot of that was more Eddie and Duke. I mean, at the end of the day, it was on box office numbers.
Hmm.
So if Eddie's running everything and the numbers are good at the box office, then, really there's no need for any involvement. Now, if things start to dip, now the owners, everybody wants to, hey Eddie, what happened here or what happened in Miami or this and that. Uh,
Let's just go around the horn. I want to ask you about some guys in some different towns and just get your thoughts so that come to mind. So let's do Orlando, Milo Steinborn.
I didn't know Milo as much, but I knew that Orlando was one of Eddie's hot towns that he wanted it to go. Milo was there, but Eddie had definite oversight over it.
I don't know. I mean, I know Ron Fuller had West Palm until he left the territory. I don't know who had it after that, but what about, did you do much in West Palm?
It was the office.
Mhm.
The office had West Palm after that.
Yeah.
But remember when Ronnie Fuller took West Palm, that was when they were running double shots,
Hmm.
double towns.
Right.
So, there's another town, West Palm's a dip. But then when we started running Dusty into West Palm, the attendance obviously went up and everything. Dusty just drew money everywhere. So,
Tuesday night was Tampa and Fort Myers. for a lot of the 70s. You obviously were in Tampa quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I'd go in Tampa, but a lot of times I was doing things like at the front gate and everything like that. But Tampa was home, you know, for everybody, and that was they wrestle. Now you're done early, no driving over to the famous Imperial Room. Uh,
Yeah,
um,
that Howard and I were just talking a couple weeks ago about the Briscoe Funk title change, and we had Don DeLeon on, and we were talking about how he kind of knew something was going to happen because the cameras were in Miami. Because most of the time, the title changes that were important like that took place in Tampa.
yeah.
So, what was the Fort Homer Hesterly Armory like?
It was hot in the summer, and cold in the winter, but nothing was as cold as the Orlando Eddie Graham Stadium because it was this big metal shed, you know. And I mean, the guys would be laying in the ring, and the steam would be coming off their bodies in the winter. It was really cold, but
I always heard Tallahassee described that way too, like a big furnace in the
yeah.
summertime.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing looking back that the guys could go, 30 to an hour in these buildings that didn't have AC and stuff. I mean, a real testament to going out there. Because I could tell you, even as a referee, in the summer, it was horrible. I mean, one of my idols, obviously, Stu Schwartz. Um, Stu Schwartz, he did a lot of matches, and people used to joke that back in the day he had white pants and white T-shirt, but he was a smart guy, staying as cool as you could under the circumstances, because those referee shirts are polyester and just cook you. But those guys back in the day, or guys like the assassin in that suit that didn't breathe, you just, you sit there and you got something that's snug on your body and the hood on your head, and you're out there for 30 minutes, like just, sweating your ass off, and excuse the French, but crazy.
Bruce, I've always wanted to ask you this. You became a referee, which we're going to get into, if not on this episode, then in the very near future. But how did you go from being kind of a, helper to acquiring the skills necessary to be a referee? And folks, he's not just a referee. Bruce is a ring general. I've seen him lead matches. I've seen him do all kinds of stuff in the ring. And I want to know how you go from being an outsider to even being an insider and having the skills required to be a referee, because the referee's job is big and a lot of people don't really notice that.
Well, um, my it was kind of interesting because I always gave the story about how I went to San Antonio for 2 months and all this and everything. It never happened. Um, so back in the day, I told Wahoo one time, is Wahoo, what do I need to do to be a referee? And he says, count to three. And, and it's just Wahoo being Wahoo. And keep in mind, I was an announcer, but I was refereeing in the northern end of the state. And eventually, I think it was Danny Miller said, "Hey, it's not good that we have an announcer and a referee," and because some of the fans traveled back then and everything. And of course, if something's a hot finish in Miami and I'm an announcer and they go, "But you're really a referee,"
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
that makes
uh,
sense.
my first match was Mike Golden and Dale Vesey, and I told Wahoo, like, it was a Broadway, and I told him I'm nervous, and I said I'll F it up, and he says you just got to stay out there for 15. So the match went 15. The bell rang, and instead of raising both guys' hands, I jumped out of the ring. And I left Mike Golden and Dale Vesey in there, and Dale Vesey was like kind of like a tweener, sometimes a heel, sometimes a baby face, but I left them both standing there. And I came back and Wahoo said, "You warned me," you know? So,
Oh, that's great.
so I
But
told
Bruce,
him,
how do you go from that to being a ring general? Because I've seen you call entire matches.
yeah, so it's kind of baptism by fire. So here's what happens. So this is Sunday night. Wednesday, um, the guys break down, and I think it was the Sunrise Musical Theater in Fort Lauderdale. And now there's no referee. And um, so Lester Welch is there, and of course he knew, and he says, can you pull it off? And I'm thinking he obviously didn't see me do that Broadway and leave both guys standing in the ring. But like anyone else in wrestling, I told him no problem.
Oh yeah, I can do it.
I'm just looking for a bump that I'll be the only referee. And the long and short, I ended up doing the matches, and I think the main event was Wyndham and Flair. It was either 60 or 90 minutes through, and everybody took care of me, and but it was baptism by fire. Eddie always told me, just be in the wrong place at the right time. Don't don't overthink it. Be in the wrong place at the right time. Stick to the corners, but if you're in doubt, just be in the right place at the wrong time. I mean, right place at the wrong time.
Here's something I've always kind of wondered about, Bruce. You'll be able to answer this. How much, when a match like that, when you've got Barry Windham, who's obviously at that time coming up to be one of the hottest young stars in the business, and you got Flair, who's got all kinds of experience by that point, and they've probably wrestled a few times before that. How much of the match was feel versus called? Like, how much did they
Um,
call in the ring, and how much did they just do naturally?
well, also, back in the time, dressing rooms were separate.
Mm-hmm.
So they would, usually have an idea what it was going to be in the town, or the referee would carry the finish over, but it wasn't obviously the match. Like now, you got to have the bell rings, and this happens, and this spot, and that spot, and everything.
Right.
Um, so you know, the way Flair explained to me one time, like for the match, and keep in mind Barry was younger back then and everything, is just tell him we're going to have 4 15-minute matches.
Hmm.
You
And
know, I heard that attributed to Dory Funk Jr. Somebody said you're so famous for your Broadways, and he's like, well, I just look at it as 4 15-minute matches, and I think that's where that had to have started, if not, whoever told Dory that. But I
yeah,
heard that attributed to Dory, so that's like and I always go back to that when I think about doing some kind of task, like when Brian Solomon talks about writing a gigantic book, he says you have to eat the whale one bite at a time. It's
That's right.
like
yeah,
divide it up.
yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of fans who are more accustomed, they've just come along to be fans in the modern era. Since the Savage Steamboat WrestleMania match, they think everything's written down and scripted and moved by movie.
Yeah.
But back in those days, it was instinctual, right? Am I right about
Yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, guys made their living at doing this. And, it wasn't like someone's going to say, I want you to do this, this, and this. Because, you bring a guy in from Texas, and Texas was a pretty brutal style out there,
Yeah.
and come to Florida. And, yeah, we have the brutal, but we also need wrestling. Um, and guys would wrestle a week or so. And, I see guys from Texas within a week they'd migrate into the Florida style and everything, which was some violence in wrestling, but the violence was the cherry on top. Where in Texas, violence was probably 70% of the match and
Who would
stuff.
be an
And
But
and
example? Who would
it,
be an example of that?
yes.
oh God, I would just say, like, I'm trying to think who would was coming
Not the
in.
Von Erichs. I mean, it would be earlier than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I would think probably in my first shot in my head would be Bobby Duncan.
Oh, good example.
Yeah.
I know in my research for the Dory Funk Senior book, I'd learned and found out that Terry actually changed his style to be more of what we know as Terry Funk while he was in Florida.
No way.
He wrestled more Texas style growing up there in Texas, more like junior and senior. And he went to Florida for a while there in 68, 69. He comes back and Dory Sr. like, what are you doing? And Terry goes, well, I've learned to do this a little bit different, a little bit more wild and this, that, and the other. And after a couple of times, Dory Sr. said, oh, I see. Yes, keep doing that. Keep doing that, right?
Yeah, it differentiated Terry drastically from Dory. You know, there used to be the shadow of Terry under Dory, just obviously like anybody, Jerry Briscoe under Jack and everything.
Right.
But you know, when Terry reinvented himself like that, the thought of being Dory's brother just went out the window. Terry Funk
Yeah.
was his own deal.
Yeah, it was a very awesome move for us as fans and for Terry's career for sure. I mean, it kept going into the '90s for God's sake.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Howard.
No, I missed Terry's babyface run in '74. What was that like? How was he as a babyface, and how did it contrast with him like 2 years later coming down as heel champion? You know, the wild and crazy heel Terry Funk. How did he relate to the fans as a babyface?
Well, you know, back then, you know, I'm still a fan, even though I'm dabbling and stuff, but nobody trusted him. Everybody thought he was going to turn every week. You
Ah,
know, they start running him with a tag partner, and everybody's just waiting for Terry to turn, but Terry didn't.
Mm.
and
You
and
know,
if you see some early Terry, man, he is flying all over the place. I thought his prime was like the stuff that I saw live, '76, whatever. Oh my God, he was really a bump machine. Like it's amazing that he
Yeah,
made it to
I
the
mean
age he made it
he made
because
it.
he burned himself. He, I mean, at the
He
rate he
made
was,
Munchnick nervous in St. Louis because he was such a flying, bumping.
yeah, like I had no idea.
yeah,
Fledgling historian that I am, I had no idea until I saw some recent tape of him, black and white, early days, lean and mean Terry Funk, and he was a bumping machine. And I mean, I don't mean for that time. I mean, just like always, ahead of his time. And I mean, he did that every night, and he did it until he was 60. That's
I
incredible.
often wonder how much pain he lived in,
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
a
because
lot.
you just can't do that to the body.
Yeah, he did. He had a lot. Uh, Most of the last 25 years of his life for
Yeah.
sure.
You know, when
Go ahead, Howard.
When I was at this ECW thing for Terry Funk in 1998, they were honoring him. 97, it was around the time of the ECW's first pay per view. And they had this tribute to Terry Funk. And Paul Heyman got up there and gave this story. And he said, do you realize that in 1989, when Funk was going through his feud with Flair, he was working on a broken tailbone the entire time? And can you imagine the pain? And, you know, that's just part of it. Add a broken tailbone to everything else that must have been going on with Terry Funk in 1989. And he did that entire feud with, I'm sure, a couple of pain pills and guts and determination. You know?
Had a terrible elbow infection,
Yeah.
also that he didn't take care of properly. But what was his '76 championship year like in Florida, Bruce?
Well, I mean, Terry, everybody wanted to see him get his ass kicked because obviously, you know, he took our hero out. Terry was he was the perfect heel and champion. How would you say?
Did they think he was beatable every night?
Um, I think they wanted to, but everybody was smart enough to know, hey, he's Dory's brother. You know, back then, like he's trained by Dory Senior, he's Dory Junior's brother. Like how are they ever going to get the belt off him? And on top of it, he's not a scientific wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the out was always the DQ finish.
So the fans sort of smelled the political part of the NWA then and thought the Funks had the political control to keep the belt on Terry. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
let me say, as a fan, this is when I was introduced to Terry, and I thought this was his golden era. This is like the classic Terry Funk, right? The NWA champion '76. And as a fan, I wasn't really aware of any of the politics or anything, but he looked the part of a champion. And every time I saw him, either on TV, in interview, or especially live, he was the best. And that's all I saw. And let me just interject, Bruce, you were probably there. Miami-Dade Community College in
Yes.
1976. Terry Funk worked Andre the Giant. And it was not only the best Andre the Giant match I've ever seen, probably one of the best matches I've ever seen. It was a long match, Japanese quality match. And I was like, holy crap. And I mean, as a kid, I was 10 years old at the time. And I mean, everything you would want from a match, probably in front of 4,000 people at a community college. And Bruce, you were probably there. Best Andre match I've ever. I mean, Andre was so agile back then.
Yes.
They had an incredible. Andre was kind of like a larger Terry Funk in this match. They were doing everything.
Yeah.
And,
I actually drove Andre that night.
wow.
But in my head, I'm thinking, that's probably the most that the Giants been kicked around.
Do you remember that match? My God.
Yeah. Well, you got Terry and Andre. That's like, that's hard not to remember. But,
if I could just say, you never saw Andre in like a 50-50 match like that before, but it was so give and take. And it wasn't like, oh, Andre's going to mop the floor with him. And Terry was believable because Terry was a big, tough guy. And it was great. They worked so great together. I actually have some faraway photos of that I took that I'm going to put up for you guys, and I'll lay out. But man, I'll never forget that match because I never knew Andre was capable of that. Even as a kid, I was so impressed.
Yeah. Also, in my head, going back in time now, I almost wonder, like, would Eddie have allowed that to happen in Tampa? Because
it was if you remember, it was a ref bump finish, and it looked like Andre was gonna, had a chance, and then there was this big ref bump at the end, which saved Terry somehow, and then Andre gave him the big splash, and then Terry caused a ref bump or something like that. They got out of it. But
so what are your thoughts about that, Bruce? Why do you think Eddie might not have wanted that at the home base town?
Well, the Giant, you always want the Giant to be the Giant. And here, like, keep in mind, okay, so what was Terry back then? 220?
So you think it reduced Andre, in other words, down
well, if you're in home base of Tampa, and I mean, I can tell you, I don't think with a camera they would have ever did that. I think it was Andre just being really generous to Terry because he liked Terry.
I've gotten heat before because I've said on Twitter and some other places that I thought Harley Race slamming the Giant was a terrible move.
Yeah.
Because I just don't
great
think
for Harley.
I don't think anybody. Yeah, right. But I don't think it's good for the Giant.
Well, you're trying to go ahead and say, like, let's go fast forward years later, Andre and Hogan. Oh, he's got him up and everything. The mystique was nobody could ever do anything to Andre. And like I said, in Tampa, I don't think Eddie Watson would have went. First of all, the Giant could have got away with whatever he wanted because he was the Giant. And he could, if Eddie says I ain't booking anymore, the Giant would say, so what, right? But if you think that, back then, Andre, Terry's kicking the Andre's ass in a 50-50. Nobody else ever that I know of got to get that much out of the Giant.
That's right. Hey, did you ever see Eddie go to the ringside or send someone down there and say, stop doing that or end the match or anything like that?
No, first of all, nobody usually did anything like that.
Yeah.
And if not, Eddie was waiting for you. Eddie didn't have to go to you. The bad news was you had to come to Eddie,
Yeah.
you know.
Were you ever
Uh,
around? Were you ever around when you saw Eddie work with guys after the match or whatever to give them feedback? Did that ever
oh,
happen? Or
oh yeah, I remember once, and I just happened to be in the right position, and I remember Eddie saying the match was a good match and a very good match, and I can't even remember who it was, but Eddie said, "I told you to throw 3 drop kicks, not 2."
hmm yeah, I've heard Kevin Sullivan tell that story.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
was the third drop kick
yeah,
on the finish?
yeah, yeah. So
I wanted to ask you too. You said you didn't go to Jacksonville very often when we were talking before the show, but were you around Don Curtis much?
I was around Don Curtis when obviously probably more in Tampa, um, and when Don was there and everything. But I don't think you could find a better human being than Don Curtis. Like, here's a guy that wrestled and took time in the daytime to work with children, in amateur wrestling. Um, you never hear a bad word about him anywhere.
What about
Just a
what
great human being.
what about Sarasota coach John Heath?
Same thing. John was a gem, you know.
That's one of the things that Eddie learned out in West Texas also was to be so community connected and have guys around you that set them up in their towns where they're very community oriented and very community connected and give back to the community for the things that the community had done for the wrestling, but paying fans had done for the wrestling business. And he executed that maybe even better than West Texas did
yeah.
in Florida.
When John Heath would come into a building in Sarasota, and you got to go back in the days, the box office was there, and people were all in line and everything. But John Heath walking into a building, and obviously he's way past his prime. John got acknowledged by a whole line full of fans more than any wrestler.
Wow.
He was the guy in Sarasota. People knew him. Always took the time to talk to people and everything.
Obviously, very connected to amateur wrestling,
Yeah, and
and
Don Kurt.
so is Don Curtis.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, there's a guy, Jay Goodley, who was one of our announcers, and he wrote a lot with Don Curtis because he lived that in Sarasota and then would come up for TV and everything. But you just anybody that knows Don or John, you just never heard so many good things. It's not a couple things, a lot of good things. And John helped me when I was starting and going back to like the transition of refereeing. It was baptism by fire. There were things I didn't know. I didn't know look for the camera, this, that, and everything. And Don would always pull me aside, or not Don, I'm sorry, John. And John would say, Bruce, here's what you want to do is be here, and never in a condescending way. And some of the guys would just, hey, you don't need to do this, you have this, like this. Um, he would always say, here's how you want to be, and this will help you, plus you get your face on TV more. He would say things like that rather than saying, hey, you were out of place. But John was just a great guy.
Go ahead, Howard.
Man, I'm just enjoying this as a fan. I feel like I'm already watching this, on YouTube. Jeez, Louise.
Shit, all we have to do is go to lunch, Howard, and we can cut Tony out of the deal.
This is so. Yeah, I mean, Bruce and I have been
I'd
threatening
fly
to
to
get together
Florida for this lunch.
Bruce and I have been threatening to get together for like 20 years, but he lives like an hour away from me. I don't do Miami. Bruce is rarely up here. I don't go to indie shows. Bruce is still completely active, like he's a 20-year-old.
Where
I
are
don't
you
get
at?
out much.
Where do you live?
I'm in Hollywood.
Okay.
Hollywood, right on the Hollywood Circle, man. We got to get together.
I went through there yesterday on my way to
Oh, come on,
West
man.
Palm. I'm serious. The traffic was jammed on the turnpike. I went through to get 95. I was
All right.
just
Well, we got to, the people don't care about this. We got to get together.
for
But
sure.
So Bruce, you're gaining trust from Eddie. You're gaining trust from the office, and many times back in these days, guys that were trusted by the office, they carried the money back from the arenas and did the account and things like that. Were you ever asked to do things like that by Eddie?
I was in Aruba, and some of us brought some cash back.
So
We did a
they ran Aruba, ran a show there.
yeah. I went another time was Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, but this was Aruba, and quite a story there where I was babysitting a midget, thought it was my responsibility, only to find out I was being worked. And I was a valet to Little Tokyo. Um, they basically told me you need to make sure he's okay, and him and Cowboy Lang. And I was babysitting two midgets for a few days, helping them with their bags everywhere, everything, only to find out I got worked.
oh, that's
So I
great.
got stooged by two midgets, little
That's
people or
great.
whatever you want to call them. But um, Little Tokyo was a great guy. So if I got ribbed by somebody, I was glad it was him.
You know,
That's great.
uh, I've done some shows on the Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw show, and we covered the life and career of Jim Barnett, who obviously was very tight with Eddie from 73, 74 on through the rest of Barnett's time in the South and all, and Eddie with him, and their positions with the NWA and things of that nature. You were around Eddie all the time, and so you saw a lot of sides of him. If you had to describe somebody from your perspective, if somebody asked you about Eddie Graham, what would you say?
Um, from a wrestling standpoint, always thinking wrestling, angles, everything. Obviously, you've heard it that he's quite the finish guy. Probably one of the best. From obviously, you missed the third drop kick. Great match, but you missed the third drop kick. Um, Eddie is a businessman, and you have to understand that Eddie didn't have the formal education growing up. So Eddie learned, how to read and different things and get a pilot's license, especially being blind in one eye and everything. So a very determined individual. The deck was stacked against him. He was poor, didn't have an education, blind in one eye. Um, if you look back, who would ever said that Eddie would, wrestling, he was a tough guy. He could get the job done in a regular fight. And, the deal with Eddie is if you got in a fight, you had to mark the guy. And if you didn't, you were gone. Simple as that. It didn't matter who you were.
Here's this guy, and I certainly can relate to his upbringing. I probably had a similar one where you grow up out in the sticks. You're just he grew up in the rural Tennessee, just around Chattanooga, and basically no way in the world this guy's ever gonna be super successful, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
and he found a way to do that. He was the one of the, if not the power broker, as Sam Mushnick was headed toward retirement in 75. Eddie was the guy coming up. And I think, Fritz von Erich had that brief presidency in 76 as the president. But after that, I think everybody thought it would probably be Eddie's ball game from then on. but he had some personal problems too that sort of prevented him from doing things like that. He had the respect of every major power broker in the entire wrestling business, but he had some issues, right?
Yeah, and first of all, I've been sober 29 years, and Howard knows me. I ran hard, and being in the wrestling business, it's easy to fall into
Bruce was a
different
lot more
traps
fun back
along the
then.
way.
Bruce was a lot more fun back then.
Yeah, yeah, but I could still
So was
go.
I.
So
Whatever.
yeah, so you know, Eddie had his demons drinking, and there were times when Eddie would fly in, and I know Eddie flew impaired because I saw it myself, and um, sometimes Eddie flew with a second pilot. The aircraft he owned, he could single fly with one crew member. But there was times Eddie flew in, and Eddie came in early in the day, and we went to a restaurant, and there's no way Eddie was going to wrestle that night. And like the Miami Beach Convention Center, there was a phone by the dressing room, and I'd have to call the phone and and ask for Mike Graham, and say, I'm with your dad. He's not going to make it to the building, and I've got him. And you talk about some of the things of the trust and everything. And
Yeah.
so behind the scenes, if we go back to some of your earlier questions, I had no family in the business. And, no offense, I wasn't any real talent. I was a photographer that we talked about, did develop my own pictures, sold those, a timekeeper, because a timekeeper died. So I became the timekeeper. I snagged his tie when they were doing CPR on him and rolled it up in my pocket. And next week I had a white shirt on, and I was the timekeeper. And, then later ring announcer when the great Frank Freeman decided to call it quits. But I was ring announcing in other towns and everything too. But when you say, like, how'd you get that quantum leap? Um, I was kind of holding off on that question, a little bit because of, I think some of it had to do with Eddie knew, and I always said you had to be dependable on time. But Eddie knew that no matter what happened to him, if I was there, nothing got out. I
Mhm.
took care of Eddie and got Eddie back to the airplane, and and Eddie wasn't flying when he was drunk back then or anything. I mean, there was another pilot or something, but Eddie had his battles on and off, and there were years that he didn't, and
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have been taken care of when I've had too much, and I'm sure everybody here has. And I've also taken care of people who've had too much. And there's a degree of difficulty from easy to hard as far as taking care of somebody, right? So,
yeah.
where's Eddie? Was he pretty easy to take care of, or was it difficult?
Um, I guess the issue would be is what time is it? And because maybe he was sobering up some,
Mm,
and he knows I can still get to the building, and maybe he can wrestle.
mm. What was the, what was, I
And
mean,
and now, so not stop you.
no, it's
They had already told the crowd that Eddie Graham is unable to appear. He was injured, whatever, or something. So
sure.
I would always tell Eddie, they already said you're unable to appear, and you were injured last night in Tampa, and or wherever the city was, if that was the case.
Yeah, so you're there. You're obviously got to stay somewhat, understanding and knowing what's going on around and all that, and you're taking care of him. How is that affecting his inner circle, the people that were around him, like Coach John Heath and Don Curtis and people like that? Were they did they just kind of not pay attention to it, or was it really bothering them, or how was that affecting the other people there?
As Killer Carl Cox would put it, it was a well-known secret.
Were they did that bother them as far as their dedication to keeping championship from wrestling going, or was
No,
that
because they were professionals, but like I'm not exposed to it, but if it was me, I would be if I was, Duke Kiyomoka, or Hero or Buddy Cole, stockholders, you know, that would have or shareholders, I should say,
right?
that would be my concern is the captain of the ship, we've got problems,
Did anybody ever ask you about or talk to you about that or say anything to you?
No, they would just tell me Eddie hasn't been in the office this week.
Gotcha. Well, where I'm kind of headed with this is how did that affect Dusty? And obviously, Dusty left in '84. Was that any part of that, or was that just Dusty looking to do something bigger for Dusty?
I mean, I always say this, and it's a little degrading, but you'll understand the analogy. Wrestling is kind of a pimp and whore business, and you're as good as the corner you're on, or your opportunity that day.
Right.
Dusty, yeah, Eddie made Dusty, but at the same time, Dusty, there wasn't another Dusty even when he was a heel. So you try to think of, I could take 10 other guys and could I turn them into the American Dream with the same scenario? It never would have happened.
Mm-mm.
So you have Dusty who's, white hot. And now the next thing is Jimmy Crockett's calling saying, you want to be the booker up here.
And by the way, guys,
And the money's 3 or 4 times X for wrestling plus the booker's fee.
Go ahead,
Bruce, can you compare and contrast the white hotness of Dusty and the general excitement generated by wrestling at that time between 1980 and 1984?
I'll tell you what I would like to have, and I don't know if the video's out there, but it would be neat to see. Back in our day, we didn't have a ramp, as you know. The doors opened up and the cops took you to the ring. But I would love to see like 30 entrances of the doors cracking open, Dusty going to the ring from all different cities.
Okay.
And you tell me what you got right there compared to anybody else.
Okay. How many weeks ago did I just say, I've seen Hogan Pops, blah, blah, blah. Nothing was bigger than Dusty and the excitement that was generated up until about 1980, right? And I have a photo that I'm going to post to demonstrate exactly what you're talking about, which is the entire crowd converging on the babyface dressing room as it opened, and Dusty's coming out and walking to the ring. They didn't wait for him to get to the ring. The entire building converged. There was a sea of people around him.
Left their seats.
And brother, yes. And man, I'm telling you guys, for any of you Johnny-come-latelys, there's never been a thing like Dusty Rhodes and what he did from 74 to 80 in Florida. Now, let's fast forward now to 1983-84. Do you not agree with my proposition that the bloom was really off the rose and Dusty was kind of old hat, and that reaction was long gone? And I don't know if it was due to the general atmosphere in wrestling, Dusty's appeal, because familiarity may have bred contempt over the years, and the lack of top-notch heels, because it's already been 2 or 3 years of Sullivan, which is far removed from Sonny King's army and Humperdinck's army and Gary Hart's army. So I would like you to tell me, realistically, compare and contrast the Dusty Rhodes and the excitement generated in 1980 versus 83, 84. My proposition is he had to go anyway. It was kind of, it was a natural progression. Florida was not what it was a couple of years previous.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many slaughters that can be done. Like the Pack Song. To me, Pack Song was probably the hottest angle, and I don't know if people have talked about it, but there were cities they put billboards up. Tampa, especially. Gary Hart's Armory. I mean, on 75 and 275 and everything. I mean, billboards through town. I mean, Dusty and Pack Song, 26 weeks, variation matches, tags, this, that, everything, sold out. People scalping tickets because we knew the building was sold out when you're a couple blocks from the auditorium and there's guys on corners. They're scalping tickets. It was that hot. But how many slaughters can he do? And then people aren't going to believe that there's anybody Dusty can't slaughter. So now you relocate them, whole new crowd, whole new audience who haven't experienced what we experienced.
Yeah.
And basically, what you got in the Mid Atlantic is the Dusty we had in those early
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. And you know what's so funny, Bruce? I always say this. Dusty, Wyndham, Buzz Sawyer, a whole bunch of guys fall into this category where they did their absolute best shit. And people think that they saw their best stuff once they were in the NWA. We know that we saw the best stuff in 1980, 82 when the wrestling world didn't know about it. But what Bruce just said is extremely true because Dusty recreated his entire paradigm, which is he gets some sympathy put upon him and he makes a comeback. That's what he did for 10 years in Florida. Well, now he had a hot, whole new crew of heels to work with in the Horsemen. And so then you just recycle the whole thing, and that went on for however long it went on for. But Bruce is completely correct in that he took Florida and what was happening there and did it to himself all over again.
And they had just taken over Georgia too, where Dusty was in Atlanta was a huge star as well, and they had seen him there, and Dusty did the best friend turns on him angle forever in a lot of places, but the Ole Anderson turn in '80. So they had a pretty ready audience to see Dusty on a more regular basis for sure. But
I think maybe due to shifting tides in the wrestling business, the availability of hot heels, because Dusty vanquished the top names going back from Mongolian Stomper, Joe LeDuc, King Curtis, Ernie Ladd, the legendary magazine cover names. Fast forward to 1983, 84, he's working Angelo Mosca, Kevin Sullivan for 2 years, Mark Lewin
Blackjack,
for 2. Huh?
Blackjack, Blackjack.
Yeah, you see, in the latter days of Florida, the main baby faces ended up being kind of like, a little played out because you had Barry, who was the workhorse. And Bruce, you'll know this. I only saw him one night of the week in Miami. He worked Frank Dusek, Bad Leroy Brown, Mark Lewin. I don't tell me he wasn't the workhorse of championship wrestling from Florida to 82 to whenever he left, because his matches were the longest, most grueling matches. And again, people think they saw, Barry Windham at his best in the NWA. We saw Barry Windham at his best in 1982 in Florida.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
would put that against,
Well, obviously, the entire year of 1985 is going to be affected by what happens at the very beginning of the year on Super Bowl Sunday, where Eddie commits suicide. How did you find out that Eddie was gone, Bruce?
Somebody from Tampa called me. I don't remember. And what was weird is, and trust me, at that point Eddie wasn't around and stuff. I wasn't around Eddie that much and stuff, other than certain towns or something. But Eddie had said to me one time, we're driving and where was it? It was in Miami. And um, Eddie, like out of nowhere, Eddie's going, how's it all going to end, Bruce? When's it all going to end? And I was like, what are you talking about, Eddie? He said, nothing, you know. And a few months later, this happened. But to this day, that I remember him saying that, and I don't know if it was related to what happened, but I don't know if we were driving for, I don't know, an hour or so probably back then, and I don't know if he was just talking out loud or like I don't know because I'm just driving,
Right.
and when he passed, it's the thing that like flashed in my head, and um, for me, it hurt because, I mean, Eddie was the godfather and Eddie let me in. I had no family or anything and no real talent. I didn't have anything that anybody else didn't have, other than Eddie knew I was loyal, dependable, and I didn't, I kept my mouth shut no matter what I saw, unless it was something, hurting Eddie. I'll give you an example. Um, Howard, I don't know if you remember Fort Lauderdale National Guard Armory.
Never went, but I'm aware.
Okay, so Herb was this big cop. When I say big, he was probably 6'2" and 360. I could outrun him only because he couldn't go far, and I could go further. But here's a policeman, and he has his family on the gate, and he's the one stealing. You know, and I told Eddie he's got 2 sets of tickets. You know, and he was setting up extra chairs, and so any ticket he sold from this roll was just right in his pocket. And so I was loyal to Eddie for something like that, and I just happened to see it, and it just seemed odd that only certain people had these tickets, this different color ticket. And just trust me, Bruce wasn't the most honest person earlier in his life, and I'm kind of thinking the way I would think,
Yeah.
and so I was always loyal to Eddie like that, and stuff. And so when you lose somebody that gave me a break, I had, what did I have to really offer the wrestling business? Eddie took a liking to me because of the aerospace background. And, way back then I had worked for Air Florida, and back then I could fly for free. Air Florida went through the state of Florida, and they ran like every 2 hours, and I could go up back to any city and stuff. But here's Eddie, who gave me a break that I would have never got. I know other people didn't get. A great referee, Mac Murray, out in the Fullers territory. I don't know the reason, if it was because he was close to the Fullers. Eddie wouldn't let him break in Florida. And yet Eddie let me work for him in Florida. And Mac was a great guy, great referee, and just a great human being. But Eddie gave me the break I never would have got. Like you talk the talent I got now, and back then, and how did I get into this? JJ Dillon told me he had a similar background, part-time in wrestling to start and everything. And like he said, Bruce, you were dependable, and a little bit of you're likable, and some of it's luck. So those were the three things.
You were in
But
the wrong place at the right time.
yeah, yeah,
Hey,
but
I mean, there's still, I mean, you still got some decent crowds, especially in Tampa, that are happening in 1985 after Eddie is gone. how, I mean, I'm sure things were running a little discombobulated as this all came up to a head when Eddie left us.
Yeah.
How did things progress in '85 then? What was it
And
like?
Well,
who was booking? And who was booking at this time?
okay, so I know Michael Hayes and Dutch were co-booking, but I looked something up and just in some notes I had, but I'm going to give you real quick. It's going to take me a minute,
That's okay.
but here's a bunch of the guys that were in Florida in '85. Okay, Dutch and Michael, Missing Link, David Sierra the Saint, Jack Hart, Barry Horowitz, Brian Blair, Jesse Barr, Pistol Pez, Raging Bull was in and out, Wild Bill Irwin, Coco Beware, Rick Rude, Percy Pringle, Wahoo Bugsy, Cowboy Ron Bass, Hector Kendall, Barry, Denny Brown, Mike Golden and Dale VC, who I mentioned earlier, Blackjack Mulligan, um, Mark Lewin, Tyree Pride, Bob Roop, The Devil, Kevin, Lex Luger, Frankie Lane, Hercules Hernandez, Tiger Conway, Scott McGee, Billy Jack, Coco Samoa, Grappler, Lady Maxine, Rip Rogers, obviously Mike Graham, Princey Akea, boy.
A lot of talent there.
Like you just think of that much talent in the state. And one of the things that drew people were the weather, wasn't always the money, but um, Eddie, and we did Battle of the Belts, I think, that year, didn't we?
How many
80,
Battle of the Belts did you do? Did
Three.
you referee?
Three. I
You
did.
referee?
Tampa was the first one. Orlando was the second, and Daytona Beach was the third.
And
I
you
mean,
ref in all of them, or
Yeah, yeah,
you mentioned Michael. You're talking about Michael Hayes because the Freebirds were in
yeah,
too.
yeah. I'm sorry, I should have said that. All the birds were in. Terry and Buddy and Michael.
How'd you think Dutch and Michael did?
Considering things were chaotic, the fact that Eddie was out, what little I know was the owners didn't know what they really wanted to do. Like, you got to think, you got Eddie, and all of a sudden now you don't have Eddie.
You don't have the final decision.
Yeah.
We're going this direction, right?
Yeah. So I believe from what I remember, Dutch, and I can't remember everything, but Dutch and Michael, they were in, it seems like to me, about a half a year.
yeah?
And I think Dutch went home I think Dutch went home first. Dutch rode with me, and Michael did too. But I think Dutch told me, Bruce, hey, thank you for everything, but I'm heading north. And
He
I think
when he talks about it, when Dutch talks about it, I think this might have been his first opportunity to be a booker, and he was very excited before he got there. I don't know. You could maybe tell us a little bit about you rode with him a lot, his thought process while he was there.
yeah, well, he flew in a lot, so I pick him up and we'd ride. But Dutch Dutch was one of them guys that, what do you think? Like, because Dutch is coming into uncharted waters. He doesn't know,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously knows Florida's different than Tennessee and Texas and other places. And, all I could tell him is, you got to remember there's no internet or anything then. So everything's kind of word of mouth. And before we finish, I need to tell you the Don Serrano story. It's 1 minute, but don't lose track of that.
Okay.
Um, so, how do we make it work? And the first thing is when Dutch is in and Michael is, who's going to get fired? That's always the first. It is. And Dutch is like, I'm just trying to give it some direction. So it was like, it's not about bringing in a bunch of guys. We have a whole bunch of guys here. But now what happens is guys that are here, they all start trying to find something on the back burner just in case something happens. Because, it's always a story. Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Then the booker starts bringing in some of his talent and this and that. So, all Dutch want to do is wrestle, make everybody successful so that everybody still had a paycheck. So that.
What was Michael's? That was Dutch. What was Michael's? You remember much about his perspective when he was helping book?
Well, Michael, was young, creative. Obviously, the birds were something hot no matter what. And hey, is there a chance we can take a 1 minute break?
Certainly.
Okay. I'm going to set the phone down just for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
God bless you, Bruce. You read my mind. I'll be right back. What do you think, Tony? Not bad, huh?
This is awesome.
Uh-huh. I think I just booked my replacement, but hey, I'm happy to, I ain't no historian.
Hey
Bruce is
guys,
the
I'm
man.
sorry, but the 15-year-old little Einstein sister says she's
Aw.
got to go.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Aw.
The little girl's faster than me. So,
It's okay. I needed a break myself. So,
okay.
man, Bruce, you're the gold man. You're the gold mine I always knew you would be. Tony's got to be like a pig in shit. Beautiful episode, just as a fan. I say, man, let's just do this forever. I'll talk once every 20 minutes. Bruce, you got the job.
Let's go
Well,
another. Let's go. Let's
he's
go.
got the good questions, so he's the
This is-
driver,
This
man.
is beautiful because, you're the GOAT historian and you're the GOAT at what you are, man. And I'm just loving this. The people are going to, come on, man. Bruce, you gotta tell us right now. You gotta do this with us forever.
Okay, hang on a second. I want to show you something. My wife would yell because my wrestling room. But see if you can see this.
Yeah.
Can you see the Eddie
Yeah.
picture?
Yeah.
Okay, and then that's Eddie's Hall of Fame,
From what group?
WCW.
Awesome.
Oh, when Soley gave it to him.
Yeah,
When Soley gave it to Mike.
yeah,
Let's save it for the air though. Okay.
yeah. So
Let's go another 10 or 15 minutes, and
Yeah.
Dominic, we'll pick it up right here where Bruce is showing us stuff.
yeah, Mike,
Bruce, you gotta
didn't-
commit. You're gonna be our guy from now on, right?
as long as I'm alive. So Mike didn't want it anymore.
You're welcome,
just
Tony.
because of the memory, and so he basically said, "Hey, Mike gave it to me."
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
So the Freebird. This is the first time the Freebirds are in Florida, right? They'd never been there before.
No.
So that's a hot new act in the state.
Yeah.
What Michael's co-booking with Dutch. So how did things go with that? Obviously they left there to go to Watts, I think.
Yeah. This is little, and I didn't have a bunch of exposure with the bookers, co-bookers for the business and everything, but Michael and Dutch, because we get to buildings early and everything, and those are two guys that I saw as booker and co-booker, and I can't remember who was which. I think Dutch was booker and Michael was co-booker. It would make more sense that Michael was the co-booker. That got along like beautifully. Just they bounced their ideas, agreed to something, and it wasn't a struggle.
Hey, Bruce, how were the houses during this time? Was there a big drop off in
Um,
'85? Because things
not-
were not that spectacular in '84 to begin with, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was more about keeping it alive and building it.
Yeah, they drew some houses in Sarasota. They drew some. I think they did the Sun Dome that
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, the
Uh,
Sun Dome was always a good building for us. It's, the Tampa school and stuff. Um, so the Sun Dome was good. Orlando was always a good wrestling town, you know. Lakeland was one of those we drop in every few months, and Lakeland was good. Lakeland, so Tampa to Orlando's about an hour and 15 minutes, and it's right in the middle between the two cities. But
did Eddie ever talk about after Dusty left? Did he ever say anything about the fact that Dusty was gone, or was he
no,
not
just
happy with it, or was he happy for
well,
Dusty, or how?
no, no, no. I mean, it was kind of a well-known secret that Dusty was gold, and so here's the thing. So even if Dusty, like we talked about, ran through different opponents and everything, and Dusty could slaughter everybody. So the will Dusty win or lose is kind of not the question. Dusty will always win or survive at the top. Um, you don't want. I'll give you an example in my business. We hired a guy that sometimes is not the guy we always wanted, um, but we don't want him working somewhere else.
Hmm.
So you keep him so that he's not somewhere else because he's valuable to you, but he's also could be valuable to someone else. So if you keep him, you're not worried about what he's doing elsewhere.
The year
Um,
the year started out with Brian Blair being the Florida champion, but as the year went on, the Florida title sort of went into a Wahoo McDaniel Rick Rude feud, right?
yeah, yeah.
How did that do?
Um, Wahoo was always a good draw, and Wahoo was in fresh. So, everyone, like if your kids had been to the matches and now you're a parent, everybody, Wahoo had been through Florida and Texas and Carolinas and Georgia so much. When Wahoo came in, you got a top draw. You just had to place them to the top or second to the top, and you knew you were going to, get the attendance pop.
I mean, there were only really 5 or 6 places guys could go at this point. They could go to Tennessee, they could go to World Class, they could go to Watts, or they could go to Crockett, or they could go to WWF. What were the guys thinking back then as far as when I'm done here? What was their mindset about what were they wanting to go then?
Some of the chatter was, thinking the territories are still going to survive. Other guys, thought get on the big ship of WWF, but they didn't want to be a character. All of a sudden you lose your wrestling identity,
Right.
because you're wrestling, but you're a garbage man or,
Right.
you know, um, you're the
You were gonna be yeah.
Coco with the bird, and so and Coco's one of the legit little tough guys in the business.
Mm-hmm.
From
You
Union
know,
City,
Let me,
Tennessee, just down the road here, Coco.
there you go.
Bruce, I gotta ask you, before I forget, a very important piece of this puzzle. There was a very, in my opinion, poor taste angle done after Eddie passed
Hated it.
on
I hated it.
TV where the Freebirds were disparaging the deceased Eddie in front of Mike, and
Oh,
Mike came out to defend the family honor. And of course, in wrestling, anything's good for business. And of course, I know without asking that, of course, the angle would have Eddie's blessing. But what was Mike's attitude during this time, and in particular, maybe doing an angle or a feud based around the Freebirds disparaging his recently deceased dad?
For me, even though I was in the business and this was my own personal view and kind of where I was going with some of the other stuff about the guys going to the different territories. you didn't talk much because this guy would go, "Oh, I heard such and such say this," and next thing it goes back to the booker. Well, if he thinks he's going to go to Mid South, let him go now. So individuals didn't say much. Because
No, but
but no,
I
but I'm
mean,
saying that's back to the earlier thing about Tony's question to Mid South WWF
yeah, yeah,
Fritz.
yeah. But I mean,
But I didn't like it only because I thought uh, there's another way to draw money that
yeah,
I'm looking at it from the fans' perspective.
I
I
thought it was
get it.
cheap and shocking. I'm sorry.
Yeah. That hey, will it draw money? Of course, it's going to draw money because it's there. But I was like, there's got to be a way to be more creative than this is your best shot is to
Mm,
do this.
right.
Um, and the fact Eddie would always like to make money, but I think Eddie wasn't looking at a scenario. I'm going to commit suicide.
It offended me. I didn't like the taste of it at
Yeah,
all.
yeah. To me,
I'm surprised. I'm surprised Gordon set still for it. Actually,
you know, um, I I just thought, back then for everybody involved, it's their job. But I just thought, like, you guys can't do better than that to draw a house.
And did it draw?
No, no, it didn't really do anything. I mean, the feud was the match, but I think, like, once the guys are wrestling a week later, they're not thinking about the interview.
is there any way that you can put yourself outside the wrestling bubble and just think like a Tampa citizen or a citizen of the state when they hear that this guy that they've heard for the last 20 years or 25 years has been this community leader with the sheriff's boys ranch and all of this community stuff that he did and the amateur wrestling and all of the stuff that Eddie did to be a citizen of the community outside the wrestling business. What did the average person think about Eddie once he was gone? Did they think there was something fishy about it, or did they just think, or what do you think they were thinking?
I think, like everyone else, a big question why, you know,
Because I
and
don't think they thought of. I mean, obviously they thought of Eddie and wrestling together.
yeah,
I think Eddie transcended that in Florida. I think they thought
yeah.
of him as a legitimate businessman. You know what I mean?
Well, he was on TV with like senators from the state and everything, and different awards. I mean, legit awards, not stuff that Eddie had a senator do on his own or anything. But Eddie was no, I think when they looked at Eddie, the first thing came was it wasn't, oh, there's that fake thing. It was more fake business. It's there's Eddie, that guy does a lot for charity.
Hmm.
So I would think that, I'm not saying kids, but I'm saying adults 25 up would probably view Eddie as Eddie does a lot for charity.
And he did a lot for the wrestling business because
Yeah,
of that, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so the Freebird angle with the disparaging stuff about Eddie doesn't draw. What did they do with that? I mean, where did they go from there?
It just, from what I remember, and I could be off, but I'm believing at that point, um, all the birds weren't there. I think Gordy had went, if I remember right. I think Gordy left. Howard, did
Correct.
Gordy leave?
He did.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Gordy left, and Buddy was kind of the trash talker on that deal. Um, but I mean, it would only be Michael and Mike Graham and Michael Hayes. And
Yeah.
if Buddy, I mean, it just the interview's over. It's just you're sitting in an arena 2 weeks later. You're really trying to remember about what he said about his dad, or hey, these guys are going to fight. it was, did it grab everybody? Oh my God, this was on TV and get a buzz for a week or so about TV. But, you know,
And it wasn't even the right. I mean, the
it
way to
was
do
one
that.
and done. It was done and over. Like
Yeah, like the way to do that correctly with a little tweaking was the Bob Roop Steve Kern POW thing,
yeah,
and that feud had legs so much so that we're talking about it 50 years later.
yeah.
As opposed to I was I was a kid at the time and I'm like that's I didn't know how they were going to broach the topic, but I'm like wow that's bad. Like
I
he
mean,
just came out and disparaged Eddie Graham and Mike is there doing an angle. That's bad.
well,
Well,
But let me ask you this: what was Mike? Did you detect any change in Mike psychologically during this period? How do you think it affected him? Obviously, it wasn't anything to be happy about. But did you notice any drastic change in Mike around this time?
I wasn't around Mike as much, but I saw him quiet. Um, and back to the Eddie thing, like, let's let Eddie be remembered for his good. Not that the last word we say about Eddie was he committed suicide.
Yeah, yeah. I
You
couldn't
know,
believe it. Yeah, that part of it, that really sums it up because that's
all,
exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
all he had to do is say, "Your father was no good." This, like that. But the last thing we need everybody remembers, for the good that Eddie did was he's committed suicide. And you also have to remember back then, you do have kids and young people watching
right.
because we had an audience all across the street of every age. And now, suicide, you're bringing a different element in that doesn't need to be in wrestling, you know.
Couple other things to mention, which is going to make us all feel old. But even though it seems like just yesterday, the summer of '85 is the year that one of the biggest television wrestling stars out today was born. Cody Rhodes was born that summer in June of '85. And then
Wow.
the other thing was the WWF came in and ran the Night Center and ran and drew about 5,000 people there. What were the guys thinking about the WWF being in Florida?
Well, obviously it's a threat, and then also it's an opportunity. There was a guy, and I don't know if you remember him, Howard, but Jimmy Young. He was a electrician or plumber, but he wrestled on TV for us, sometimes under a mask. But he wrestled for us on Miami Beach Convention Center, double shotted across town, about 20 minutes away, because he's already in his gear. And then he worked for WWF on the same night. Uh,
Hmm.
Again, a lot of this stuff, people got away with stuff because there's no internet, nothing tracking anybody.
Right.
Right.
But there was a curiosity factor and obviously the concern, you know, because, it's like the outlaw wrestling in the time. That's like setting up an apple cart in front of the grocery store,
Hmm.
you know. So, um, and this is real because this ain't some outlaw group. You got a national brand with TV coming into where you are. And a lot of the people, some of the guys had jumped ship. So some of the fans followed the wrestlers. That's where it was whether or not you're putting butts in the seat or not.
Right.
So if you're a wrestling star and you're putting butts in the seat, they're going to go to the WWF show and see who they want, and vice versa to the NWA.
And then that Labor Day weekend or somewhere around that Labor Day there is when the first Battle of the Belts happened at the Sundome in Tampa.
Yeah,
And
with the hurricane.
and that was an early attempt to syndicate a wrestling event. We didn't have pay-per-view. I mean, the Starcades had been closed circuit, but the Battle of the Belts, they broadcast that. I think it was Hubbard Broadcasting, and they put that in 15 markets. They put it into Dallas and Boston and Charlotte. And let's just run down that card real fast, and then we'll get your thoughts about it, Bruce. But we had Hector and Chavo Guerrero beat Rip Oliver and Lynn Denton under the mask as the grappler.
Yeah,
Ken,
I took
Ken,
my first bump ever in
Ken,
that match,
Ken,
and I said to Chavo, where'd I need to be? He says, "Don't worry, I'll find you, amigo," and he did.
Coco Samoa defeated Rip Rogers. Kendall Windham won the Florida title by beating Jack Hart. And then the match we mentioned earlier, the AWA World Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, or they didn't beat, but they battled Stan Hansen and Harley Race to a double countout. And you
Yeah.
ref that match?
No,
he did.
I don't think I did that one. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know that I did Jack Kendall Wyndham's first title change, because if you look, I counted the two, and when I'm coming down with the three, Kendall's already coming up. And I of course I banged the three because it's a title change and everything, and the camera's got to catch it right or do whatever they can in editing and stuff. But we had a hurricane off the coast. We didn't know if that thing was going to be a go or not. And obviously, with all the financial investments, everybody had got into town like 2 days early, because we didn't know if that hurricane was going to get us enough and shut down the airports.
And then you had Nick Bockwinkel defeating Frank Lang. And then on top, it was the NWA
Somebody
World.
no-showed. I think Rick Martel no-showed.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
Which Martel would have been the AWA champion, right? So he no-showed.
Um,
He was the AWA world champion in '85. He dropped the belt to Hansen at the end of the year.
if I'm right, it was Martel that no-showed.
It probably would have been because that's the Battle of the Belts, right? So they
Yeah,
probably,
yeah. There you go.
they probably had him there for as a champion. And
Yeah,
then
I know they were hot. I know they were hot. I know Matsuda was there, and Matsuda was hot like when Martel wasn't. It was Martel. He wasn't coming. Yeah, and Hero just had honorable relationships with everybody, and like this is our big deal. The belts, like you say, about all the belts, everything,
yeah,
and he no showed.
and this is
And I don't know what excuse he gave, but there was no reason not to show.
And I'm sure I mean, this is 8 months after Eddie's gone, and there's been this discombobulation and the different bookers and Dutch leaving, and they're probably thinking, man, this is our big, this is going to get us back on track. This Battle of the Belts, we got all this invested in it, and I could see where he'd be pretty upset that that key piece. I mean, that's your semifinal,
Yeah.
on this big card, because you got
Wahoo was booking that. That would have been Wahoo booking at the time too.
and he worked on top. Wahoo worked on top in the match against Ric Flair.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
Anything else you remember about that card or that day?
Just pissed off at Martel because there was no reason, and plus it was a big opportunity and big payday, to be in, and the fact that the roadies made it in, and there's just no reason for him not to show, and he didn't show.
Were they happy with it? Other than that,
You know, from a perspective that there was a hurricane looming, and we had some intermediate power outages that you'll see during the show where the lights flickered a few times and stuff. It was the best that we could pull off, because keep in mind it was bringing in names to get our guys over.
yeah. And I was a tape trader at the time because it didn't get into any market of television that I could see at the time, and I think I had a satellite dish, but I don't think I could find it or something, so I couldn't wait to get that tape. So I remember at the time when I got the tape and I saw the show, I'm like, man, Florida's going to make it. Florida's going to be okay after watching that show.
Yeah, it gave us hope. And then obviously we did Battle of the Belts 2 and 3.
because it was in the context of Pro Wrestling USA and Tennessee and Crockett's working together, and they're coming into Lexington with the Great American Bash tour, and they're drawing 8 and 9,000 people, and you turn on and you see this big show in Florida, and you think, and everything's the WWF isn't going to take over the world. I mean, as a Southern wrestling fan, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, we're going to hold this. We're going to hold this together. Then in October, Wahoo took the title back from Rude, and I guess that is where Rude's not there much longer than that. He goes back to World Class, I think, because they were going to put their brand new World Championship in World Class on Rude.
Yeah.
What do you think about Wahoo as a booker?
Obviously, with all the experience he had in being on top as a wrestler, it's not a dig at Dusty, because Dusty rode with me and Dusty helped me a lot and everything. But Wahoo was a wrestler that main evented. Dusty was more an attraction. Dusty was, the promo guy and everything, and the bionic elbow and everything. So if you compared the bionic elbow to Wahoo's chops, where do you think credibility was?
Yeah, sure.
That's a good analogy. Bruce, let me ask you something. I always try to ask people for a heartwarming or a good-natured story about Dusty. Did you ever see, like, and I know you were good friends with him. You traveled up and down the roads with him at different times. I mean, can you tell a story that would humanize him to the people? Because I know a lot of the stories out there, the preponderance of them are about him being not too nice to the fans.
The distant superstar.
No, I was good friends with Howard Brody, as was Bruce. And he told me some great stories of Dusty as an actual human being, and I know that Bruce probably has some too. So I'd like to hear at least one good story about Dusty being nice and self-aware and self-effacing and humorous.
Well, I know one time he offered to pick up the bill for the table, and a couple of the other guys at the table, including me, were about to say something, and I said, "Done, thank you." Like, and I just saved everybody at the table some money. But Dusty had a good side of him. I mean, the booker in many cases is loved by a few and hated by many.
Not just the booker, though. I mean, as a person, as a backstage personality.
But I'm saying,
I've seen him walk into buildings. I've seen how he is. Have you seen him drop that, use his real voice, just be a man, not the jive gimmick?
I've seen Dusty in the car with the Dusty voice for hours. And I remember Blackjack Mulligan saying, "Drop the lisp, Dusty, and tell me what you're trying to say." Because Dusty had a few beers, and Blackjack's in the back can't understand him, And I mean, Dusty took care of me, and I don't know if it was because of Eddie, that I got decent paydays and stuff, and but after Eddie, Dusty, he had me come up for the homecoming and everything. He took care of me. I mean, Dusty always treated me good, and I would hope that it was that, like back then they needed me for a ring announcer and a tux and everything, and he treated me good, and trust me, Dusty, all Dusty had to say is, "I don't want to use him anymore." And that was it. I mean, Dusty had me, what was the guy's name? And he was the black gentleman for WWF. He was a ring announcer caught in the scandal. Mel Phillips.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I don't know what happened, but Dusty wanted me as the announcer in West Palm, and not as a referee for a while. I don't know what the deal was, but he said, and I just said, and I showed up that night, and of course he's there. I've never met Mel Phillips or anything, but and Dusty and JJ, you know how that building was. We met in the back in that wraparound hallway, and Dusty says, we need to fire Mel, and Dusty says, I'm the baby face. So JJ, you do it. JJ says, um, I'm the heel, and that's okay. But he says it's Bruce's new job, so Bruce needs to fire him. So, and I'm still young, and and I go up to this guy, and he tells me to fuck off, and of course I already got the lineup and everything, and then JJ says, "What'd he say?" He said, "Fuck off." And and I wasn't gonna say Dusty said or JJ. And so Dusty, Dusty being Dusty, says, tells the police, "See that man over there?" And, "Oh yeah, the announcer and everything." So now he tells the cops that, tell him he needs to leave the building, and the office said he's no longer the announcer. So now the police fire him.
Mel Phillips fires Mel Phillips. Wow.
Yeah, the police fire Mel Phillips.
I never knew he was down here. I never knew he started down here.
He did some WWF shows. He was doing WWF shows, house shows, and then I don't know who was assigning the announcers, but maybe someone thought, "Hey, we'll get the announcer, we'll get some intel or something." I don't know what the deal was, but somebody found out that we had the WWF announcer, and basically, I assume that's why they wanted him out, but I don't know, but it was who's going to fire him, and finally we got the police to fire him.
Good move.
But
go ahead.
But Dusty was Dusty when I was with him. So here's a funny story, and he did kind of drop character that night. We go into a liquor store after the matches, going to the airport on the private charters, and there's a liquor store with a bar on it. So Blackjack Mulligan and Dusty go in the bar. Not the bar, I'm sorry, the liquor store. But you can see into the bar, and of course, Dusty comes in, and Blackjack, the people spot him. And I never forget this drunk coming up to Dusty and going, "Oh my God, it's Flapjack Mulligan and Rusty Rhodes." And and it was, it was just that moment where Dusty couldn't keep a straight face, or Blackjack, and they both signed autographs, but they signed them as Flapjack Mulligan and Rusty Rhodes.
Amazing.
That's tremendous.
So that momentum from the Labor Day weekend, from the Battle of the Bells, that kind of continues, because in November at the convention center in Miami, you guys draw 5,000 people, and Coco Samoa beat Jimmy Young. Lady Maxine defeated Peggy Lee Pringle. Hector Guerrero over Prince Iakea. Wahoo McDaniel beat Ron Slinker, the martial artist. Barry and Kendall Windham beat Lex Luger and Purple Haze, who was Mark Lewin, who's probably over 50 years old at this point. We talked a little. I wanted to ask you about Lex Luger, because he comes in this year, his first year in the business, early on. What was Lex like during these times?
I'm trying to be nice to your podcast.
That's okay.
He's just so full of shit and full of himself.
I mean, I think everybody knows Lex is a different guy today than he was back then. I was
Yeah.
just looking for your perspective of him.
Yeah. I think Bob Roop and someone found him on a golf course or something. Um, and he just thought he was it. He had no respect for the business. And I actually remember at the Clash of Champions, and I'll jump right back to where we are.
Sure.
He wouldn't even blade himself. So they had to slam him on the hood of the car, and JJ bladed him.
Yeah.
Scared to blade himself. Bob Roop bladed him before because he wouldn't blade himself. He's a pretty boy. He just thought he was it. I never forget one time when he won the Southern belt. He just walked in, threw it on the ground, threw it in the corner like it was a piece of shit, and the guys looked at him and he said something like, I'll be in Hollywood next year or something. He was not liked, and he was tolerated.
The next week or so on the 19th in Tampa, Wahoo puts him over, as you just said, for the Southern title. And I think that the perspective about him then was that he's a bodybuilder that Hiro Matsuda had trained to wrestle a little bit. But I think people thought he's probably going to be gone to one of the other two bigger organizations at some point, which did happen.
Yeah.
But I think the ray of sunshine in all this is that you're still drawing 4,000 and 5,000 and 6,000 people to some of these buildings at the end of '85.
Yeah.
So things didn't totally fall apart after Eddie wasn't around.
And you got to be careful with the Miami figures because one of my jobs was to call in the newspaper and throw the numbers.
So on the 27th, now that you say that, on November 27th, the reported number that I have for that is 5792, and that had Dusty and Magnum and Wahoo in a 6-man with Ric Flair, Ole, and Arn Anderson. Would that have been fairly accurate?
Yeah, that one would have been fairly accurate. And when we get into that Don Serrano story, I'll
I haven't forgotten. Let's do that now. What's the Don Serrano story?
So I was young, good looking, and Don Serrano, he was trying to chase on my potential reset, okay, and so and he kept like interfering, like just trying to, I'd be somewhere and he'd show up and sit down and just, and I'd have to move with the reset. And and so what I did, because I called in the results for certain towns, I jobbed him out for over a year.
Which he did to himself anyway. I mean, it's not like he was.
Yeah, but the most I ever gave him was a DQ win. But I jobbed him out 90% of the time. And you got to think back then, the other promoters like Bill Watts and everybody, they went by newspaper clippings.
Right.
And what the results were. Because I was pretty tight with Bill Watts, and I had actually bought the Mid-South collection from belts from Bill. And I would send Bill some of the clippings, and Bill and I have been friends for decades. But I jobbed Serrano out forever.
Wow. Do you still have those belts?
I put them into a millionaire where the money was insane that I got for them. I bought them from the Cowboy for $22,000, and the nameplate where they spelled Ric Flair RICK on the big gold belt wrong. That went to a guy that's I'm blank for his name right now, but he's a historian for the Mid-Atlantic. Um, and I do have the Fuller belt from the territory, the ring use belt from Continental, or no, Southeastern Championship Wrestling.
All right.
I have that, and I've talked to Conrad Thompson a little on that. I may, if I let it go to him or Milliken. But I had all the Florida belts and everything. But like, I'll give you an example. I bought the Wyndham's belt, the WrestleMania belt from Barry. Barry gave it to me for like 2,000, just because I always hauled them around and everything. And I bought Rotundos on an eBay auction, but I sold them for 15,000 each cash.
Wow.
And this is back in whatever it was then, 80 something.
Was that Dick Bourne that bought the belt from you?
No,
No, not Dick Bourne, the Mid-Atlantic guys. Wasn't him.
no.
Okay.
Dick Bourne might have been the guy that got the nameplate. I did it through Dave Milliken because he was a big historian, and
Yeah,
there's
Dick.
a book. There's a book that's written in it. He credits me for the finding it and then him getting it in his possession and everything. It's just I like the guys that preserve the history because
I got the belt. I got the book right over here on my bookshelf. That's why I wondered if it was Dick.
yeah, they're just good people that do that. It's unrewarding, and it preserves the histories of people like myself or Howard or people that love it. So
You bet. So that November 27th card, I should mention too, that was in Miami that drew 5792. That was the night before Thanksgiving. So that was the night before Starrcade 85, which had the big Dusty broken ankle angle where he was coming back in the main event against Flair. So the working relationship here between Dusty and Florida, that's going to continue to go on for the next couple of years. Howard, do you have any other closing thoughts about 1985?
Well, plenty, and I think we could do at least a three-parter on this because we haven't even included encroaching outsiders like an independent group known as the IWA, which I know we don't have time for in this episode.
Right.
But there was a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes that I was privy to between, let's do a teaser for the next one,
Okay.
between the IWA led by Wild Bill Wenhold and Beverly Shades, who were doing a pretty good production out of North Florida. And I have to say, without the absence of a top babyface, pound for pound, doing better shows than Florida. There, I said it. And we'll use that as a teaser. And all I want to say is, I think this is the dream team. Let me speak every 35 to 40 minutes. This is a fan's dream come true. Having Bruce introduced to the podcast world, having Tony get to do his thing with my friend Bruce. Wrestling world, thank you. You're welcome. Happy New Year to you guys. Thank you for everything. And for me, this has been a delight. We are going to see more of Bruce.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. And Happy New Year from the Sunshine State for me.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate you, man. We'll have you back, okay?
thank you so much, Tony, for everything you do, and Howard. Likewise, we'll get together.
Please.
Good health to everybody in 2026.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that look back at 1985 in the territory of Florida that was still going. And you heard they had several shows drawing in the 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 fan range in 1985. So fans in Florida, even though the WWF was coming into Florida and they ran shows there and drew pretty well, they had Mr. Jerry Briscoe on the Vince McMahon team, and he was very familiar with those buildings and those building owners in Florida. And he was helping with those shows down there. Of course, as a Florida longtime resident and businessman, that was a tremendous help to Vince McMahon and the WWF in that 1985 national expansion. We've talked about the great team that he put together with Jim Barnett helping with television. And we'll talk about that more as we go on. Today's focus was on Florida. And how about Bruce Owens? I mean, he loves the business of professional wrestling. And what a great guest. And Bruce will be back on the show, I promise you, because he came in 73, 74. And so he could add a lot to our shows going forward with Howard Baum and I. when we discuss the Florida territory. So I'm sure we'll have Bruce back. Thanks a lot to him for joining our show and being a part of what we're doing here to document territory wrestling history, which is what we do at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel. And this history show that we do is made possible by you. I mean, if there's nobody out there listening to what we do, watching what we do, supporting what we do, we have nothing. So I originally envisioned this as a place for people who loved the territory era of professional wrestling to be able to go back and to learn about it and find out about it. I always say, if you want to get your PhD in the territory era, then you need to subscribe to my Substack channel, Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel, because I publish a wrestling history newsletter every single day called the Daily Chronicle. Speaking of the Florida territory, I had that in mind this week because I just did a Daily Chronicle where my feature article was on the life and career of Coach John Heath. And you heard Bruce talk about him today, who was the primary promoter for Championship Wrestling from Florida in the town of Sarasota. And so if you subscribe to the Daily Chronicle, it's absolutely free. It'll show up in your inbox and your email every single day. It's also published on our website at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Substack channel. If you want to support us in a financial way, that's pretty easy as well. We call that being a premium investor. And so if you want to be a premium investor to what I do with this documentation of territory era wrestling history, it's a suggested $5 a month and $60 a year. So you can subscribe and you'll get premium content that I write. I just released the year in review of 1965. We still have 75 and 85 to go in that series. I also just published my 31 great television announcers of the territory era series. We just did this week profile number 8 on the great Bill Mercer of World Class Championship Wrestling. So we'd love to have you as a subscriber at the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Substack. We also have a YouTube channel. We just passed 500 subscribers. And that may not be very many to a lot of people, but to us, it's fantastic that we crossed the 500 subscriber line. That means we're growing and getting new subscribers every week to our YouTube channel. We are getting close to 3,000 people in our Facebook Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Facebook group. So we have a lot of people that are supporting us. Thank you so much for your support. I'm humbled by it. I'm grateful for it because it means you like what we're doing here, and we're going to continue to do it because of you. You can also follow me on X, which is my largest social media channel with almost 18,000 followers. Tony at Tony Richards 4, the number 4 at Tony Richards 4 on X. Coming up next week here on the show, we're going to Texas and World Class Championship Wrestling. My friend Lance Peterson, it'll be his first time on the show. We've got a lot of first-time guests going into the brand new year here. And Lance will be here to talk about World Class Championship Wrestling in the year of 1985. And that'll be next week right here on the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Wrestling History Show. Thank you so much for all your great support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you here again next week. Don't forget, if you want better neighbors, be a better neighbor. So long from the Richards Ranch and goodbye from the Bluegrass State. This is Tony Richards saying love you, mean it. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pro Wrestling Time Tunnel Podcast. Tune in for another great episode next week, interviewing wrestlers, referees, and media personalities that have made the sport of professional wrestling great. We'll release a new episode soon. Don't you dare miss it.